Morning, everyone. Hello, and welcome to this Connecticut Main Street Center program. At the request of municipalities throughout Connecticut, we are pleased to present a four-part series that introduces the Main Street approach to downtown revitalization. My name is Kimberly Parsons Whitaker. This webinar will introduce organization, the civic engagement point of bringing Main Street back to life. Connecticut Main Street Center is the expert resource for developing and sustaining vibrant downtowns and main streets that fuel our state's prosperity. Our mission is to assess, to educate, to convene, and to advocate to develop and grow downtowns. We help Connecticut create the places where people want to live. We assist municipalities, downtown management organizations, small businesses, and property owners be more knowledgeable. We help communities understand how to bring about incremental and transformative economic development appropriate to their communities. And we highlight and guide developers toward investment opportunities. I want to say a word about our sponsors and our funding partners, to whom we are very, very grateful. Connecticut Main Street Center's founding sponsors are Eversource and the State of Connecticut Department of Economic and Community Development. And our growth sponsors are Avangrid and the Connecticut State Historic Preservation Office. Our educational programs, Main Street Forums for the 21st Century, are sponsored by Webster Bank, Avangrid, and Farmington Bank Community Foundation. And our corporate investors are People's United Bank, Capital for Change, Windsor Federal, and M&T Bank. We also have important strategic partnerships, including our partnership with FHI Studio, our AICP certification maintenance provider. And a note to our planners, and there are quite a few on today's webinar, this webinar is approved for 1 CM credit. Some quick housekeeping notes. This webinar will be about 1 hour, and we're going to stop for questions at the end. Please feel free to type your questions in the chat function as we go along. And you'll receive an evaluation survey shortly after this webinar. Please take a moment to complete this survey as it helps us develop meaningful educational programs for you. This Main Street 4-Point Approach webinar series is generously sponsored by Liberty Bank. And today's webinar will introduce you to Connecticut Main Street Center's newest staff, including Carl Rosa, who is our Field Services Director, and Kristen Lopez, our Education and Training Director. At Connecticut Main Street Center, we believe that vibrant, sustainable main streets are developed around these 6 components: a unique sense of place, economic vitality, community engagement, and policies that support appropriate growth, equitable places and inclusive practices, sustainable practices and protection of natural resources, and connectivity with a focus on multimodal transit. And within these 6 components are elements that are necessary for a truly vibrant downtown that caters first to the needs of its citizens. These elements are necessary in order to attract residents, visitors, businesses, and investors. Main Street retail, restaurants, and small businesses won't thrive without people living within walking distance. And people won't stroll, shop, and dine without a sense of place, including clean and attractive, walkable, interesting storefronts. And the healthiest communities are those where the community is engaged in determining the future, those that are inclusive and welcoming, where the environment is a priority and development is appropriate to the setting. The Main Street approach that we're going to talk about today was developed by the National Trust for Historic Preservation in the 1970s to address the neglect and demolition of historic downtowns. And the Trust discovered that downtowns had lost their value in these 4 distinct areas. We had lost our economic value, our physical value, our social value, and our civic value. This Main Street approach was developed to address the restoration of these values simultaneously. Both comprehensive and incremental, this is intended to be a framework guiding revitalization efforts. Now, every community and commercial district is different, with its own distinctive assets and sense of place. The Main Street approach provides a practical, adaptable framework for downtown transformation that's tailored to local conditions. Now, our previous webinars in this series have covered economic vitality, design, and promotion. Economic vitality is about diversifying the district's economic base. It includes assessing the district, encouraging strong businesses, and positioning the district to attract investment. Design is all things visual and physical and addresses the physical assets, the connectivity, and the walkability of your downtown. And promotion is grounded in understanding your market, then building your brand, creating events that bring people to downtown, and supporting the retail and restaurant community with destination marketing activities. So I'd like to turn this over to Carl, who's going to kick off our webinar today about organization.
Thank you, Kim, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. We are going to talk today about point 4, which is organization, and it doesn't involve restoring civic value, which also involves building leadership and strong organizational capacity, ensuring a broad community engagement and support, and of course, forging public and private partnerships across all sectors. Having covered economic vitality, design, and promotion, now that you have a vision for what you'd like to see for your downtown, you will need a good organizational structure in place for implementation, measurement, and achievement of desired results. Organization is as much about having a structure in place to administer the Main Street 4 points as it is about telling people who you are, what you do, and why you do what you do. It is as much about being a catalyst for change as it is about being a convener to build the collective will of support for your downtown and for your organization. So let's break it down. We're going to cover today 6 areas of focus, 6 components of organization: building coalitions and partnerships, volunteer recruitment and development, fundraising, board of directors, administration, and messaging and outreach. Let's start with building coalitions and partnerships. Putting together a coalition of downtown stakeholders, municipal leaders, community members, and partners is paramount for the success of any downtown revitalization strategy. This is the group with a shared vision that will identify the challenges, formulate the mission, and support the strategy for implementation moving forward. Their enthusiasm, input, expertise, and guidance are not only necessary, but will also validate the process and add credibility to your program. So just who are the stakeholders, the partners, the municipal leaders, and community members? Well, here's a suggested list of individuals and organizations that should be represented with your Main Street program. And we've kind of broken them down a little bit into the 4-point categories, but there's a lot of crossover and what I would call cross-pollination between the points, but you'll get the idea. For instance, under economic vitality, you should definitely have representatives of municipal leaders, perhaps the mayor or the first selectman or someone from their office, economic development coordinators, police, fire, public works, certainly people from the business community, chambers of commerce, local banks, also planning and zoning, historical groups, neighborhood groups and residents, garden clubs, your civic organizations, colleges and universities, and of course, arts and culture, museums, attractions in your downtown, and the downtown business owners. Basically, a lot of good stakeholders and groups that come together to be part of your downtown fabric. Now we're going to get into volunteer recruitment and development. Let's face it, there's nothing more powerful than the heart of a volunteer. And volunteers are necessary for the success of your Main Street program or your professionally managed downtown program. Now, people volunteer for many reasons, but mostly it's because 1, they were asked. Simple as that. 2, perhaps their organization or the company that they work for was involved, so they get involved. 3, They know a family member or a friend that perhaps would benefit by their volunteering for a particular organization. And 4, they found out about the volunteer needs on the media or in a public setting. And so they're interested now and they want to become a volunteer. So when you're recruiting your volunteers for your Main Street program, it's important to have a good process in place that involves a thorough definition of your program needs and tasks required, a good screening process, an appropriate and effective volunteer orientation and training strategy, committed supervision and evaluation, and of course, a mechanism for annual or more often than that, volunteer recognition. Let's start with defining your program needs and required tasks. As your stakeholders and partners, in the context of the mission and vision for your downtown, identify areas that need attention and focus. They are categorized under each one of the Main Street 4 points. Committees are formed, work plans are drafted, and tasks are identified. The need and the focus can then be clearly defined and described to prospective volunteers who know that they want to help and are looking for guidance and direction on how they could apply their time and their talents. So have the description of your downtown and your program ready. Now we get into screening volunteers. Good volunteer selection is key to a strong organization set up for accomplishment and success. Consequently, bad volunteer selection contributes to sometimes a lower morale in your organization. It might set a tone that the organization doesn't care and could damage the integrity of the program. So it's absolutely appropriate to interview and screen your volunteers. The goal is to match organizational needs with the volunteer needs and establish a sense of pride for both parties. So for orientation and training, as you assemble a group of ready, willing, and able volunteers with time on their hands and specific talents that they can make a difference with your organization, it's now time to offer them specific training and orientation. The goal is to fully inform the volunteer about your downtown and program so that when they are asked, they can effectively communicate to the public and other potential volunteers. Here's some elements to a good orientation strategy. First, you're going to want to develop a specific agenda. You're going to want to be able to describe the history of the downtown and your program. You're going to want to provide an organizational chart for your program, which kind of highlights the administrative staff, the board of directors. Provide an overview of the downtown challenges. What might be the proposed work plans and tasks where volunteers will be needed? And then provide procedures. For example, information about the supervisor is or who you're going to report to, what's the contact information, who's keeping the records, and who's tracking the volunteer hours. Now, regarding supervision and evaluation, which would be the next slide, that's it. The volunteer needs to understand the role of the executive director. It's important for the volunteer to know basically what the chain of command is, who's in charge, and what the expectations are. Now, having said that, remember, the volunteer wants to contribute and wants to make a difference. So in that regard, it's important to have an evaluation, feedback, and a recognition process in place. When I was director of Main Street Waterbury, we would recognize our volunteers at our annual meeting for their hard work and efforts throughout the year. In addition, we would typically select a volunteer of the year for each one of the 4 points of the committees. And so that was special recognition that we made sure that we wanted to have at the meeting. Now, when we had major events, we would gather our volunteers that were going to be working at that event for an orientation session, usually a few days before the event. And we'd give them the event details, describe what we thought their actions and their tasks should be, then have some Q&A just to make sure that there were no questions, that everyone knew what their responsibilities were on the day of the event. After the event, a couple of days after the event, we would gather the same group of volunteers together, again, at a downtown restaurant, have a meal, and then have a wrap-up session and get their feedback. Hear from the volunteers on things like what worked and what didn't work at the event. What was their experiences? What ways could we make the event better? And we took their suggestions to heart. And this was a total volunteer engagement exercise, but it yielded tremendous results for our event moving forward in the future. And that's one example of how you can really bring your volunteers together and have them be part of the process. Next slide. Fundraising. Now, many Main Street programs are structured as 501c3 not-for-profit entities. So this gives them the ability to accept tax-deductible contributions and donations, apply for foundation and other grants, and have fundraising events. But there are other downtown management models as well, such as business improvement districts or special improvement districts, economic development offices or local chambers of commerces, and even public-private partnership organizations that manage downtown revitalization. But all models require funds and funding sources to administer their programs. Now, funding for a Main Street program can come from multiple sources, such as government grants or fee-for-service contracts from the municipality, private donations and contributions, sponsorships, fundraising events, grants from foundations, fees for services. For instance, if you're managing a particular program that's funded from another source, you may be able to take an administrative fee for doing that work. Merchandise sales, and memberships. Now, let's face it, a deep dive into fundraising could be a topic for a future webinar, but to suffice it to say, having a good funding strategy to operate your program is a necessity. In all instances, when you're asking for money, you should have ready a compelling story to tell about your downtown and your Main Street program. Be ready to state the mission and the vision. Be able to explain the process and be ready to show results. In other words, state the why. Board of directors. Whether you have a Main Street program or another downtown management model, having a dynamic, well-informed, proactive, and supportive governing board is a major key for success. The two major roles of a board member are advocacy for your program and ensuring the fiscal integrity, stability, and growth of your program. Your board members should be willing to roll up their sleeves and actively get involved with your downtown program. They should commit to volunteering in at least one of your committees. Advocacy. It's very important for your board to be well informed about your organization, its missions, its goals, and its vision. Each one of your board members should be able to articulate very clearly when asked what your organization does, what you stand for, and of course, state the why. Fiscal integrity. Good governance is paramount to the success of your program. Your board should set in place the mechanism for a good checks and balances system of accountability. They will have to ensure a good, sound fiscal support operation in order to achieve a good administrative result. The board, along with the administrative staff, is responsible for crafting an effective and realistic fund development strategy to ensure consistent and long-lasting operations. Your board member makeup should be reflective of the coalition of stakeholders and partners that help to form the organization. Administration. Above all else, absolutely hiring a professional full-time program director and administrator should be the norm, not the exception. The 4 points and the Main Street strategy require undivided attention when it comes to administering the program, coordinating the volunteers, managing staff, and being the organizational spokesperson and champion for your downtown. Staff support will be required specifically for things like fiscal management, event coordination, marketing, and other related tasks. As far as your location is concerned, a good, very visible, and welcoming office location on Main Street works the best. If you can't be located at street level, bring your program to the streets. Be visible. Make frequent visits to your merchants, businesses, and organizations in your downtown. Be on a first-name basis with your managers and staff. Inform and engage them with your newsletters, events, and programming. The more they know and are aware of your efforts to make downtown better, the more they will be inclined to participate and help out. Messaging and outreach. So when it comes to messaging and outreach, you'll need a process to get the word out. In other words, you'll need a good communications plan. This would include identifying your target audience, your messaging, and the communication platforms that best match your targets. This particular point is not to be confused with the process for promoting and branding your downtown, which we discussed in the promotion webinar, but rather it's to cover how you are informing people about your organization. You obviously have supporters and people interested in volunteering for your organization. How are you communicating with them and the community at large? What is your outreach plan for letting people know how they can help you? So when it comes to getting the word out about all aspects of your organization and what you do, it's important to remember that all aspects of media should be on the table. Here's a list: newspapers, websites, and we did cover websites previously, but again, this is websites about your organization. Social media, webinars, newsletters, email, local radio and TV, blogs, and of course, live presentations. Let's get started with newspapers. Be prepared with a good media contact list. Know who the reporters are that would cover downtown stories for your local newspaper. Have a good press package assembled with all the necessary information, maps, good visuals, and basic data. If you don't know already, learn how to put together a good press release. Remember, local newspapers, for the most part, they want to cover stories about your downtown. It's where people gather, and it's also where a lot of stories happen. Websites. Putting together a dynamic, easy to navigate website is very important. In addition to being very informative, a good website can have a great visual impact as well. Remember, you have great images for your downtown. Show them. You should assemble an archive of good quality downtown images to use. It's important to be informative and factual, but your website shouldn't be so wordy that you bore and lose the viewer. Your website should include the basic facts about your downtown and have a business directory. Should include an interactive map with all your points of interest, restaurants, cultural attractions, and most importantly, parking locations. We can't forget that. It should also include an events calendar of all activities scheduled for and in your downtown. It should have an archive section to view images of past and recent events and accomplishments. You may also want to feature a blog section where pertinent stories and articles could be posted relating to your downtown or good downtown management practices. As a nonprofit, you may want to sell merchandise on your website. Have a mechanism on your site to do that. People would love to support you by purchasing that "I love my downtown" t-shirt or hat or related merchandise. A very important point is to make sure your website has an easy to find section that talks about your organization. It should also include information about the staff, the board of directors, committee volunteers, projects underway, sponsors, donors, supporters. It should also have a section for people to reach out to you and a section for people to sign up to volunteer. Your contact information and address should be clearly indicated. Remember, your website tells your organization's story as well. Social media. Social media gives you the opportunity to cost-effectively target your audience with your message. Whether it's whether it's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, Snapchat, and we can go on about that, or any other app, you have the opportunity to tailor your story, your visual, your video. The more shares and likes you get, the more widespread and far-reaching your message will travel. I'd like to refer you to the Small Business Resource Library on the Connecticut Main Street Center website for some YouTube clips on social media. Webinars. Webinars, such as the one we're on today, are good interactive tools to help you get your message out. They're informative, educational, and they can be recorded and shared at a later date. Newsletters. Newsletters are a great way to keep the community informed and engaged with your downtown organization. It's an opportunity to focus on specific stories about accomplishments and downtown improvements. It could include features like Volunteer of the Month or Donor of the Month. It could include upcoming events. Newsletters are a great way to keep the community informed as to what you've been up to lately. They can be printed and handed out throughout your downtown. They can be digitized and emailed to your list, as well as posted on your website and other social media outlets. They're often a great icebreaker handout when people are asking about your organization. Email. A staple in your arsenal should be compiling a good email list. This list should include all of your downtown businesses and organizations, your major stakeholders, your volunteers and supporters, board members and staff, municipal officials, property owners, all offices that are downtown, sponsors and donors, and of course, any other interested party that wants to find out about what's going on in your downtown. As important as it is to compile a comprehensive email list, it's just as important to keep it updated and current. You should know that there are also various email services that you may want to contract with that would help out with your larger email blasts. Services like MailChimp and Constant Contact are good for you to look into. Local radio and TV. If you're fortunate enough to have a local radio station in your community, see if they offer community programming. This is a good opportunity to tell your downtown story and keep listeners updated. Yes, believe it or not, there are still many people who listen to AM radio, and many communities also have public access cable channels. In fact, as mandated by the FCC, cable systems with 3,500 subscribers or more are required to offer up to 4 cable access channels to the public, in most instances for free. So there is a sector of the cable subscribing public that does turn to these channels for community updates and local organization news of interest. And as technology continues to evolve, production has shifted to digital. So cable studio facilities are still being used for production. This is certainly an opportunity I would recommend you look into, because it's a good way to get the word out. Blogs or columns. You may want to get into the habit of writing a blog or a column as a platform for informing the community about specific downtown standards and good downtown public policy. It's more like an educational strategy, but it gives you the opportunity to control the narrative, to let people know what you want to let them know about your downtown. And then we have live presentations. Let's face it, there's nothing like a good old-fashioned in-person visit to a neighborhood group, a community organization, a municipal meeting, or other public forum to get your word out. Whether it's a committee of 5 or an audience of 100, never pass up the opportunity to present your organization's mission and vision to the public about your downtown. And don't forget to have a lot of good visuals and handouts for effective takeaways. So to recap, the 6 areas of organization that you should be focused on are building coalitions and partnerships, volunteer recruitment and development, fundraising, board of directors, administration, and messaging and outreach. Great organization can make your program even greater. Tying in with the other 3 Main Street points of economic vitality, design, and promotion, all applied and working together in unison and concert, will ensure the best results for your program as you accomplish great things for your downtown. And Connecticut Main Street Center can help you with all of that.
Thanks so much, Carl, for our 4th point in the Main Street approach, talking about organization. We'll now open it up for questions. So please feel free to type in your questions regarding organization or any of the other points that we've talked about throughout this series. Again, as part of this whole series, it's been a basic overview. Each and every one of these points are huge deep dives, especially on organization, where each of the components is its own deep dive in and of itself. But one of the really key points that I wanted to just drive home again, and this was actually a question we got a couple weeks ago, is, wow, it sounds like Main Streets have a lot of work to do. There's a lot of things to, get done. Do you recommend that, you need a full-time person to get done? And absolutely, we strongly believe that in order to have a thriving Main Street program, you have to manage it. There has to be a full-time person running the show. Carl, do you have anything else to add on that point?
Yeah, I mean, as a spokesperson for your downtown, you're the champion for downtown, and your organization is the champion for downtown. And that takes a lot of hours investment because on any given day, you're juggling all the different aspects of downtown revitalization. You're dealing with design things and promotion things and events and dealing with public works for certain challenges or public safety issues. So really to pay the attention that it deserves for your downtown management program, it needs to be full-time. There's no question about it. And a good support staff with that full-time managers would be ideal, but start with a full-time champion for your downtown, most definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. And, going back to the organization point, right? We talked about these 6 components here, which, really gets down to how do you run the internal operations of your Main Street program. And there's a couple of points that I think, Carl, you and I just saw. And so when we talk about organization, especially the messaging and outreach, is we're talking about that the organization doing all this great work tells their story, that your Main Street is doing this hard work. And that's important for when it comes to funding and telling your compelling why. If you don't talk about what you're doing, you can kind of fall back in the shadows. And Carl and I were just in Simsbury for a groundbreaking, and we were so happy to hear that Sarah from the Main Street manager, she was getting called out like almost every other speaker. And we were so happy to see that because her position, the work that she does, is so valuable to that community. And I think sometimes, and Carl, if you can speak on this, sometimes as a Main Street manager or someone who's doing this work, you're so caught up in putting on the great events, putting on the great retail promotions, working behind the scenes on getting that design plan up, that you forget to tell your own story.
And I think, Kristen, to that point, it's so important that all members of the organization, whether they be your board of directors, your volunteers, your staff, people that are working with your organization, that they fully get the message and understand your organization. Particularly your board of directors. I like to always say, your board member should be ready to give the 3-minute, the 30-second, or the 30-minute presentation when asked, what is your organization all about? Why are you a board member for this Main Street program? And they should be well-versed on what your program stands for, the work it's doing, and the impact it's having in your downtown. That is the goal. And certainly your volunteers should be well-versed as well as to why they're volunteering for your organization, They certainly have an interest and an excitement for seeing your downtown get better. They want to be involved, but they should also have a comprehensive overview of what your program stands for. It's so important.
Yeah, the board of directors it's vital to any organization, but particularly, for Main Street programs, needing your board of directors to be engaged, to know what's going on, especially if the board of directors are, local property owners, and they need to be informed and engaged.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
If I can jump in for a second,
sure.
Both of you, I would be remiss if I didn't mention, for the sake of our audience, many of whom are members of the Connecticut Main Street Network. We obviously have a great number of communities that have joined through their municipalities, either their economic development departments or their planning department. And a number of those communities don't have a dedicated downtown organization per se, whether a Main Street nonprofit or a special services district or business improvement district. And so much of what Carl covered in this today and what we're talking about, we have over the years, our role is to help encourage those communities that may not have a downtown organization to take this knowledge and see what you have in the way of partners already on the private sector, and how the public and the private sectors can work together to sort of create that culture of downtown management, even if today you don't have a dedicated organization. So there's so much here. Yes, the typical Main Street approach coming out of the National Main Street Center from decades ago was this dedicated organization. But there's so much that a community can do right now, minus that structure, that can follow this approach, utilizing the talent and the skills and the passion of people that are in the community to create this kind of managed approach to their downtown.
And Kim, that segues perfectly into another point I wanted to bring up regarding volunteers and why it's important to track your volunteer hours. Independent sector, the publication puts a value on volunteer hours. And so there's a certain value for the volunteer hour in Connecticut, for example. Now, why is that important? It's important because you can turn around to your funders and supporters and show the impact that your volunteers are having on the program and on your downtown by quantifying the hours they're putting into the good work that's getting done in the downtown. So don't underestimate the impact and the importance of your volunteers and tracking the hours and the work that they're putting in. It's good leverage for fundraising, and it's good leverage for community support, and more importantly, municipal city support for your program as well. So it's a key point I wanted to make. We talked a little bit about it during the actual presentation, but I can't underscore the point enough. Track your volunteer hours. You can assign an actual monetary value to the impact and then show that impact to the people that you would go ask money from. And it's a compelling story.
Absolutely.
Carl, could I add one thing? When you're talking about telling your story, and previously you were talking about skills like writing a good press release, I was trying to find it during your presentation. It took me a little while. We do have a communications toolkit on our website that I will chat out, and it will be on the resources page that has instructions for writing a good press release and other really important communication tips and tricks, best practices.
That's great. And again, another important point is really get to know those people that are going to be writing those stories. Because they're always looking for news items, updates, new impacts and developments and changes in your downtown. They're all potential stories waiting to be written and shown. So being able to write a good press release that piques their interest and gets them interested in covering that is important.
Yeah, this toolkit also has tips for good photography. It has quite a bit of information that I think would be useful to everybody.
That's excellent. I mean, we're so used to using our phones, and that's certainly important to take pictures of everything. Certainly could be used, but you want to make sure that your visual images are good quality, They can be reproduced and used in other publications that you want to produce, and that they are certainly a good visual that's telling your story as well. So it's not just about whipping out the phone and taking some pictures. You want good, professionally done pictures as well.
Please feel free to type in any questions or maybe challenge areas that you have in the organization point, or any of the 4 points that we've been talking about over the last 4 weeks. And, you know, something that's really coming to me and just Carl, what you had just said about when you're writing a press release, you know, have good relationships with the people that will talk about you. And it really comes back down to this slide that we shared earlier in the presentation about the stakeholders. You know, at the core of what we're talking about truly are strong relationships, not just working only with the municipal leaders, not only working with just nonprofits, but really working with every single stakeholder of the downtown, and how critical that is to getting this work done.
Most definitely. Not to underscore the point, residents are very important. Residents in your downtown, not just residents of the community at large, but in your downtown. Very important to have them part of the process. But downtown is everybody's neighborhood. So the more inclusive you can be with input and support from a broad range of folks that all have a common interest. You know, this is a topic that everyone agrees on. Okay. And if everyone does their job right, everybody wins. You know, the property owners, the building owners, the downtown businesses and organizations, the residents, the community. You know, if it's done properly, everybody wins in this model. So, you know, that's so important to be inclusive, to have representation from all those folks. They have input. They want to give their input. And this is something that interests an awful lot of people. So bring them into your circle, bring them into your mix.
Carl, we got a question here. Please give examples of volunteer organizations and what roles they play.
Volunteer organizations, you mean other organizations that offer volunteers that you could take advantage of? You know, sometimes if you're a 501c3 not-for-profit, doing work in your community, you may want to partner up with organizations that are in your downtown that have a volunteer roster that would be willing to help you out. Or you may want to think in terms of doing some collaborative events with them where you both share in the interest in maybe some of the fundraising, and you take advantage of, volunteer groups working together on a common cause. But basically, for your program, sometimes you want to solicit volunteers specifically for your program, but you may get volunteers that volunteer for other organizations as well that are volunteering for you. So it's, you know, everybody's welcome, but it is important to make sure you're screening too, because, you know, I can't stress enough the importance of the volunteer wanting to get some kind of inspiration and some kind of feeling of satisfaction and accomplishment by volunteering for the organization. They get something out of it too. It's not only about the recognition, but about them making a difference and feeling that they made a difference. So
Carl, one thing that I know we talked about a great deal years ago when we were helping local Main Street programs get off the ground and get started. One thing we advised for the organization committee, and this can be a project of just about any committee really, but it kind of was housed in organization, was to do a quick inventory of just this that you see on the screen and others that are, you know, very specific to your community, of the organizations and the partners within the downtown area, within the community, and just, you know, really capture what are their missions, what are their major areas of interest, the major initiatives that they do, so that you as a young Main Street program can see how that overlaps with your mission in downtown, because that is a really strategic way to start the relationships with various other volunteer organizations.
That's an excellent point. And to that end also, you may want to consider, finding a volunteer coordinator, someone that might be not necessarily a staff position, but another volunteer that wants to coordinate the volunteer efforts. You know, this person will have to have some level of orientation and training to understand the program and the mission and the vision and all of those factors. But having a volunteer coordination strategy might be part of your program as well. In fact, I would almost recommend that as a additional point to organization, is to find that volunteer coordinator. That could be kind of like a buffer go-between between, you know, volunteers and administration, and just add a really nice connection to bringing more volunteers into the mix.
Yeah, well, we're talking a lot about volunteers, just to also note that, of course, volunteers can do, you know, physical labor, whether that's, you know, cleaning up streets or planting flower beds or directing, you know, providing assistance at an event. But it can also be professional volunteerism, a social media volunteer, a photographer, a website manager. You know, it can also be those types of ways to volunteer.
Yeah, I tell folks a lot that you may be a graphic designer, and you may think that might be a good fit for you to volunteer for the promotion committee of Main Street. But if that's what you do for a living, maybe you really like flowers. So in that regard, I think I'll volunteer for the design committee. I know I have a talent because I'm a graphic artist or whatever, but I think I would rather do something that I think would be fun for me. I'm going to volunteer for the design committee. It doesn't necessarily have to be the specific profession that you're in, although that certainly is important. I mean, you want folks from development and graphic artists and web people but you also want people that are willing to roll up their sleeves and do some of the work, the litter picking and the event people, the volunteers that are going to work with crowds and people that are coming to your events and set up people, and people that are going to do a little manual labor as well. So there's all types of tasks and things that can be done by a volunteer. It's important that you articulate the specific tasks that are available. And this comes down to a good volunteer coordination program. Making sure you lay out your specific needs that you want volunteers to get involved in, and then you start working with the volunteers to get them in the areas that they'll give you the biggest impact. Let's
talk for a second about youth involvement in Main Street programs, youth involvement on the volunteer basis in downtowns. There are a lot of high schools, certainly, that have community service requirements as part of their requirement for high school kids. So there's a sort of a built-in opportunity there. On the tactical level, different ideas that I've seen play out really well in downtowns is a group of young people that attend downtown events. If your organization, your Main Street organization, needs to capture demographics, where people are coming from, what the zip code is of where they're coming from, what they're doing while they're there. People generally are less intimidated by a teenager walking up to them with a clipboard than by an adult. So there's a good opportunity to sort of get your teens and young people involved on the tactical level there, as well as if you are doing focus groups on, you're armed with, we've already talked about, you're armed with market data and psychographics of your community. But you want some more input, both for your program as well as to engage citizens. Simsbury Main Street Partnership did a great job with this in gathering all sorts of groups, including a focus group of teenagers for a downtown design charrette that was done many years ago. So we want to make sure that we don't forget people under legal adult age because they are the future of the town, of the community itself. And then I always like to underscore, and we've mentioned it in our grid before, but I always like to underscore the importance of bringing in the faith-based community. The faith-based community in all sorts of towns and cities are very strong. They are part of our community. And so I think just sort of approaching the leaders of faith-based communities, as well as people on, just people that you're encountering, just to see what passions that they bring to the table and how they might like to be a part of downtown success.
Yeah.
And Kim, you reminded me, in addition to the faith-based community, there are other organizations as well, particularly youth-based, that you can take advantage of an opportunity to get their volunteerism. The Scouts, we use the Young Police Explorers in our community in Waterbury for different events, and they're looking for projects and ways to make an impact and a difference. So reach out to some of those youth organizations that are in your community, and they can be very helpful for your cause as well.
We got a chat in, not really a question, but a comment, and I'm just going to paraphrase here from Lex about talking about experiencing a lot of resistance to email and communication. Maybe it's talking about IT problems in terms of the community activities. And Lex, not knowing too much, about the situation, but if there's a resistance or if there's a barrier between communicating with your stakeholders, one, I would look to what is the communication mix that you're using. We have provided a great list of a lot of different ways, right, that we can communicate with our stakeholders, but then also too looking at how you're doing what you're currently doing now. If you're using email a lot, are you emailing too much? Are you emailing too little? Because that can also be a problem too, where people forget about you over a period of time. Are you providing value in your communications where people actually want to open it up and read it? So those are just a couple of thoughts that come to mind right now.
Yes, sometimes, there might be different reasons why you would need to send out an email. Certainly you might want to spread your newsletter, but you may need to send out like business alerts. For example, it's one mechanism to alert your community, your downtown community, that there might be some construction going on in your downtown, which is going to cause traffic to be held up, or snow removal, milling and paving operations, things that you are going to have to get the word out to folks, that let them know that there might be some disruption while these services are taking place. So that's another reason to use email, to be that central point to disseminate important information about your downtown. This all falls under the organization approach. Certainly updates about things going on in downtown. So there's a reason why email might be used, and every downtown is different. But that's why if you have a large list, you may want to consider using a third-party service like a MailChimp or Constant Contact, or something that does a professional job, that you can tailor your messaging specifically for that purpose, and they'll get rid of duplicate email addresses, and they'll clean it up for you and get it out there effectively, and it's not going to be listed as, hopefully, as spam, and we'll get the message the way it should get out there.
Yeah. We're going to wrap up here in a little bit. If there was any other, questions, please feel free to chat them in. But my last question I have for you, Carl, and Kim, is, in your work of, this Main Street approach, what is one area that you think communities tend to focus too much on at the expense of kind of neglecting other points in the Main Street approach?
I think that, and this is a national conversation with our national organization, in recent years, there has been a great deal of focus on downtown events. And that is not that it's too much focus in my mind. Rather, it's been that Yes, downtown is a staging area. It's a natural staging area for all sorts of events. But it's really, really important. And we've underscored this in all 4 points here, that when you're doing events, you need to understand the market realities. You need to understand who these events are for. So a great friend who used to work in the Town Green District in New Haven, when she was talking about the events that they were creating and helping to sponsor in the Ninth Square, well, this was a district that was primarily millennials, single people, young married people. And so they would get comments in their organization about, well, why aren't you doing family events in the Ninth Square? Well, the reality was all they needed to do was look at their data. At that particular moment in time, it's changed a little bit now, but at that moment in time, they had no families living in the Ninth Square. So it's make sure that your understanding of your market informs everything that you do, but especially if you are event heavy. And I understand that because you want to bring people to downtown, but make sure it's really grounded in a very thorough understanding of your market.
Yeah, I would agree with Kim on that. I think it's events, but also understanding that the other aspects of downtown need to be addressed. The other points, you could have all the events you want in your downtown, but if you're not paying attention to the aspects of design and economic vitality, it could be a one and done for these events, or people will go to it and, maybe not return the next time you try and have that event. So all 4 points need to be working in concert with each other, and then you can get the most, successful outcome. It's not just about having an event and thinking a bunch of people are going to come downtown.
Yeah, absolutely. I know we need to wrap up, and I want to do a little promo for our next webinar. But thank you first and foremost to Carl and Kristen. We are so delighted to have them both on our staff as the newest members of the Connecticut Main Street team. So the Connecticut Main Street Network extends throughout our state. It includes professionally managed downtowns and neighborhood districts, as well as municipal planning and economic development departments, and 2 regional organizations representing the interests of the many towns in their regions. We also have a professional affiliate membership program for industry professionals. And this network provides our communities with access to specialized expertise relevant to downtown revitalization in many, many different areas. And so we encourage you to tap into that professional affiliate network. Our field services director, once again, Carl Rosa, he is eager, as you can see, to assist you in your downtown revitalization efforts. So don't hesitate to reach out to Carl. And we encourage you to visit our website, ctmainstreet.org, where you will find all of our webinars, including this series, a link to our YouTube channel, a directory of our professional affiliate members, and our small business video library, which was created for us at the start of the pandemic. And you can find this entire series on the Introduction to the Main Street Approach on our website. And now we are so excited about our next webinar, Food for Thought, What to Consider When Launching Food Halls and Public Markets. There are many communities in our state that have abandoned or underutilized large buildings in or adjacent to their main street. So Kristen Lopez, our new Education and Training Director, will introduce to you what you should consider regarding the space, the management model, recruitment of vendors, and marketing. And we are delighted to feature Parkville Market in Hartford, which is Connecticut's first food hall, and the plans for a regional public market in Windsor Locks. And so that is on February 22nd at 10 a.m. And you will get in your email inbox registration for that. Once again, we thank you for attending this series. We thank all of our sponsors and our program partners, including the sponsor of this Main Street Approach series, Liberty Bank. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great day, and don't hesitate to reach out to us.